Clearly look for the keywords. And for example, that one is spring at the school. Don't open the paper to the first page and go, Inspector calls, oh yeah, I watched that film. What the difference is in those two things is, are you using commas in the right place?
Today I am joined with Mrs Cory, an English teacher, as you've seen her on a previous live stream. Today we're going to be talking all things English and preparing for Thursday's GCSE English Literature Paper 2. We've got a list of questions down here. We're going to get through all of them, so just grab a coffee, grab tea, whatever you want, and we're just going to get through them. Okay, so first question, yeah. Tell us about the Paper 2 itself and how it will be different from Paper 1.
Okay, Paper 2 then, it's going to be tackling a range of text. If you're looking at AQA, it's going to be tackling a drama first. Your first set of questions will be about modern plays, modern text. Going into there's an anthology and of short stories, or there's prose text, and then going into poetry.
Okay.
The Edexcel paper will be looking at bear with me, sorry.
That's fine.
It starts with the novels. It goes into a comparison of anthology poems,
okay,
and then unseen poems as well.
Okay, good, yeah. What advice would you give to people who didn't do so well in the Paper 1, and what can they change and work on for Paper 2?
Okay. Well, there might be a variety of reasons why you think you haven't done well on Paper 1, but you need to also remember that English isn't a right and wrong answer. If you followed the guidance of your teacher, which would have been to look for evidence in the text, back it up with your comments, I'm sure you would have done fine. Sometimes we feel as if we haven't done as well as we have, so you shouldn't worry. Moving forward, you need to make sure that you have a last minute look over your text, and it might be the easiest way to do that is to maybe listen to a recording. Would might be a lot quicker than going through and reading a play, or watch a performance of it if you can get a performance of it online. For example, it might be difficult to watch Lord of the Flies. I'm not sure if it's on Netflix or if it's on any of those streaming shows at the moment. Yeah. But just see if you can't do that, to go through it. Your short stories should be relatively quick for you to go through. But if they're not, and you've got your novel, say for example Animal Farm or Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, my advice would be is to sit down with your friends. Definitely. And just to go through the text, because they're chunky text. Sit down, work through it together, maybe brainstorm the characters, the themes, and refresh yourself that way. Okay,
brilliant, yeah. So we are just a few days now before Paper 2. What tips would you give about how to plan your revision from now until the exam?
More or less just what I've said. I would definitely, unless you really like to work alone, I would work with others. It's so much easier because you've all got different ideas and you can bounce off each other. Okay. Definitely go and make mind maps for your characters. Yeah. And the themes, and see where they interlink. A character will drive a theme, or the theme will, they won't be able to be taken apart. So you need to look at how they interlink, because that's probably where your questions are going to come out. Yeah.
Okay. So MSc viewers always ask what type of questions will come up in the exam. Do you have any advice on that?
Again, we're not working on legacy papers, we are working on these new papers. This is our third presentation of them. And so there isn't a lot out there that we can look at to say this has come before or this hasn't come before. But you can guarantee you need to know your characters. Yeah. Don't neglect the smaller characters. I remember once Wimmick coming up on Great Expectations and people saying, who was that? And he plays this very small part. So it would be a case of going through all your characters and seeing where you can do some revision for them. Okay. And with the poems, again, making sure you've got your themes of your poems and how you can cross-refer them. Okay,
cool. Could you give us a few examples of different types of worded questions that might come up, and how would you approach that?
Okay, what I'll do then, if that's okay, is just have a little look. For example, there's last year a question come up from Jane Eyre, and it was explore Bronte's presentation, how she presents the arrival of spring at Lowick School. Now, it could be anything that comes up with that as an example. The school is damp. It's dreadful. It's set in a beautiful county, but actually it's really pretty dismal for them. So spring is such a highlight. So don't neglect things like the seasons and how they will go through, or how time passes through your novels as well.
Makes sense, yeah.
It wouldn't, rather than just thinking, it's going to be to do with Jane's neglect or those kind of issues in the play, in the novel.
Yeah. So obviously with English, you are writing for a very long time. I know I struggled with that personally. How do you plan an answer when you see the exam question? Like, what's the first thought? To look for the keywords in the question. Clearly look for the keywords. And for example, that one is spring at the school. So you're not going to be talking about later in the novel. You're going to be talking about that initial part of the novel. And you need to go through and look at how it changes, because or how you would compare that to the other seasons at the school. So you need to make a plan. And I would always spend a good 10 minutes going through my plan and clearly saying, right, I'm going to talk about this, and then that, and then this, and you can always go back to that and keep reminding yourself of how you're answering the question, which is important. Okay, yeah. So I also struggled with reading personally. So for those who do struggle with reading and don't read often, how can they prepare their best for paper 2?
Again, reading is a big part. It's of the literature text, because you not only need to read a play, you need to read a novel and an anthology of poems. So my only advice is to listen to them. Maybe it might be getting an audiobook, going online and get yourself a copy of an audiobook. We've got a few days left. You could probably do 4 hours of a short novel. It might be worth spending that time to read through the novel again. Or for any students coming up for next year, my advice might be to ask your parents to invest in an audiobook of the novel. You can listen to it while you're doing other homework, and you can sit and you can go through that. Maybe you might want to read the poems yourself. Most of them you can get on YouTube online and listen to them. It's just looking for other strategies of what works for you. If you're not a...
This is almost like a follow-up question itself. If people have left their revision to the last minute, which a lot of people do, can they still do some useful things to help them in the exam?
Definitely, and I would go back to it being a case of sitting down with your friends for that revision and working together, because if anything, you can be not stealing their ideas, but magpieing is a better word, magpie their ideas and borrow them, and they will bring information back to you. You sat in a classroom probably for 8 weeks learning that novel. Things would have sunk in that you don't realise have sunk in. To sit with us and discuss it, it'll help it bring that information out for you.
Yeah, cool. Okay. What are the most common mistakes that people might make in the exam?
Okay, now I've been looking at some of the chief examiner reports, and they talk about rubrics infringement, and that is where you don't answer the question properly. So say for example they ask you to read say for example on the AQA paper, questions 1 to 24, you should go through and you should look for your novel and your play. The first one you're going to come across is Inspector Calls, then Blood Brothers, then History Boys, and generally they're always in the right order. Don't open the paper to the first page and go, Inspector Calls, oh yeah, I watched that film, I'll have a go at that question, when actually you should be looking at Curious Incident of the Night, which is like 10 pages in. Okay, and that is the biggest thing, is you don't go through the paper. So spend a minute, flick through the paper, turn the corner of the page over if you have to, and then go through and make sure you are answering the right question. Then make sure you're answering the question correctly. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Have you got any final tips for those that want the extra marks and that are really eager to get them?
I always tell my students to go online and look at the analysis of poems and characters that are available.
Yeah.
But I would not, and that is great, but I would not neglect your gut reaction, because each of the exam boards will be looking for your personal engagement or your personal response. And being perceptive and finding something that maybe you discussed at the dining table with your dad, because he studied that novel as well. Look for something a bit more unique, as long as you can back it up with evidence. Sometimes you can gain some more marks for just being a little bit more perceptive. You need to look for the hidden meaning. You need to look for the deeper meaning. So if you imagine it like an iceberg, at the top it's going to be very surface, and as you go down, and look for how it links to other areas in a novel. Maybe there's a thread that the novelist or the playwright has run through, and it's not so obvious. They're the things, the more sophisticated hidden meanings that you can pick up on, and maybe be awarded with high marks.
Okay, so some people who are doing different exam boards are worried about the differences. If you could spend a little bit of time explaining how they can pick up marks, I'm sure that would help a lot of people.
Okay, well, when I looked, because I haven't taught AQA for many years, I looked into their exam criteria, their marking criteria. And the assessment one of the assessment objectives they have is for the accuracy of it's the vocabulary, sentence structures, and how you come across. So how effective you are writing your essay. That's kind of embedded in to Edexcel, but with AQA there is a clear 4 marks that are available. You can imagine 4 marks can take you from one grade boundary to another. So that's quite important. It comes up, I believe, on the first set of questions on AQA, which is your section A, which is your longer essay that will be for prose or drama. And they call it a threshold performance, which says your spelling has reasonable accuracy, your range of vocabulary, the errors do not hinder the meaning. You get 1 mark. Intermediate then is where you're considerably accurate and your sentence achieve control. That's what the difference is in those two things is, are you using commas in the right place? Are you using embedded clauses? So finally, comma, in conclusion, comma. And it's putting in those lovely little language techniques that we use in language, but they need to be applied here for literature. And they can make the difference between a 4 or a 5, a 5 or a 6. They could take you into a different grade boundary, and they're quite important. The higher performance, if that's something that you're really good at, you might want to then look at extending your vocabulary. And it's something that was asked by one of our students in the last video that we looked at for the previous paper, and what vocabulary could you use. And that's where you would say, this is where you would maybe use your technical language. You know, that this is a metaphor, this is anaphora, this is, there's loads of those words out there, and a glossary is a good place to start with that. If you're confident in your technical accuracy, I would then start to get these 4 marks for AQA. I would be going back and looking over a glossary of literary terms.
So what about Edexcel? Is that any different?
No, for Edexcel there isn't any. You need to be coherent. I think is the word that's used to get the higher grades. And so therefore you need to again make sure that you are using good vocabulary and sentence structures. However, I've known examiners haven't marked a student down if they've used enough and spelt it ENUFF. As long as you're phonetic, for Edexcel it's not so. You don't need these marks. As long as you're making yourself clear, you're not going to. These marks could make the difference between a 4 and a 5, or a 5 and a 6 for a student who is desperate for those grades. And it's not such a big problem for an Edexcel student.
Exam time can be challenging. If you're finding it difficult to cope, follow the links in the description for information on the support available.